All right, I'm excited to get back into our Bible study this evening on communication. I'm pretty sure when we start the video here, we'll be starting a new lesson, a new video, a new lesson. And so Pastor Camp's going to take a few minutes to do a review of what we've been learning from James chapter 3 on the tongue. And I think tonight he's going to have us turn to Colossians chapter 4, if I remember correctly, but you'll hear him announce that. If you're following along in the notes, it'll be page 24 at the very top is where we'll be continuing in our notes, in our class notes on this. Page 24 is where he'll be picking back up. And so he'll take a few minutes to review, and then he'll continue on at page 24 in the notes. We'll watch about 25, 30 minutes, and then as he's continuing the lesson, the video will pause, and we'll stop there because we'll be out of time. And so it'll be about 25 minutes tonight. We'll pause the video halfway through. All right, so page 24 is where we'll continue in our notes. And Brenda, you can go ahead and roll it.
Just a little bit that we covered last week, and also remind you again, if you would like a copy of our notes or similar notes, if you would email us and we'll get that to you. If you have any questions about things that I have said or things that you want me to cover, email me those and we'll work on those as well. Begin with Colossians chapter 4 and verse number 6 again tonight, our theme verse that we used last time, which will of course be our theme verse for the whole section that we're covering that we've entitled The Communication that Brings Companionship. We reminded us last week that the number one problem in marriage is not financial problems, it's not sexual immorality, it is the lack of or the wrong kind of communication. And we saw last time the Bible has much to say about our tongue, our speech. And Colossians 4:6 says, "Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man." Now, I won't go into everything, of course, that I said last week. You can go back and look at that video. But we saw the purpose of communication last time. And the purpose, of course, was to build companionship. It wasn't good for man to be alone. And so a companion for him, and communication is between that companion is the only way that the special oneness that God meant Adam and Eve to have, and Adam and Eve did have it before the fall, is through proper communication. We saw the potential of communication in James chapter 3, that potential is to influence other people for their help. We also saw that it was possible to be unstable, and of course that would bring hurt. And then we saw that there was an inconsistency that reveals a hypocrisy. And I think all of us would or should at least, and can admit that we need to improve our communication, and we need to be more consistent by allowing God to work in our heart. And we pointed out last time that from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So when the heart is right, the tongue will communicate much better. Then we also last time looked at what we call the principles of communication. And we saw a couple things, and I'll remind us here. The first thing we saw was the avenues of communication. And we looked at what we called the verbal. And how the verbal, of course, deals with words, and how words usually, in all communications, really conveys the least amount of communication. I ran across a little poem about words this week. Thought I'd read it to us. It says, "A careless word may kindle strife. A cruel word may wreck a life. A bitter word may hate and steal. A brutal word may smite and kill. A gracious word may soothe the way. A joyous word may light the way. A timely word may lessen stress. A loving word may heal and bless." So we need to be careful about the words that we use, because it definitely will affect other people. And then we talked about the vocal. Of course, that deals with tone. And I pointed out how men have a greater issue with tone than women do. Men use tone with one another and don't think anything about it, but when we use tone with our wives or our daughters, we find that very easily they can become hurt. And last time we talked about how that carries a greater impact on communication than the verbal does. In that, there's a great difference when it comes to boys and girls and that vocal. I remembered back, my oldest daughter was a young teenager, and I coached a basketball team for boys and basketball team for girls. And I found out during that time that boys and girls were a whole lot different. You know, I could holler out to the boys, "Get your mind in the game," you know, and they'd just sort of suck it up and go do that. I did that same thing at a girl one night in the game. She was playing erratic, and I hollered out to her, "Get your mind in the game." And she was dribbling the ball up the court, and right in the middle of doing that, she just dropped the ball, started bawling, and said, "You're mad at me." And why? Because I had said to her what I had said to the guy and didn't think about her getting her feelings hurt. I was simply trying to coach her to get her mind in the game. But the vocal affects ladies a whole lot different. Then we talked about the visual last time. And of course, that's nonverbal body language, facial expressions, and eye contact, and different posture and mannerisms, hand gestures, and all those type of things that communicate so much. And that carries a great amount. About 50% of the impact of communication is visual. So we saw the avenues, and then we started, and we ended last time with how we can influence people. And I'll make a reference to that again, but tonight I want to pick up with what I call the attention of communication. Now, of course, the attention of communication deals with listening. And I would say that men, by far, are worse listeners than women are. Last week I made a statement about men dealing with facts and women dealing with emotions. You know, men deal with emotions too. Most men's emotions sometimes comes out as anger. Women, by the way, do deal with facts as well. But in these two, the women's emotion usually is not anger, it's usually tears. But as a generalization, men are more factual, and generalization, women are more emotion. I don't know how many times my wife and I'd be talking and she'd ask me this question, "Well, how you feel about that?" And I'd look at her and say, "I don't feel at all about that. I don't have any feelings toward that." And so that's more what I meant. Men were facts. Women have a feeling involved, and they want to know how we feel. And men just don't do a whole lot of feeling when it comes to that type of thing. And we'll deal with that more as we come along. But tonight, the attention of communication. You know, people spend more time listening than they do talking. Now, unless you're a preacher or a teacher or some type of person in charge of communication, then you're going to speak more than others. But most people listen more than they speak. And when it comes to husband and wife, each one should listen well. And that's something that I've had to learn over the years, is do more listening. But one thing I found out through this is most people were raised with bad listening habits. If a parent does not teach their children to listen by demanding obedience, when a parent speaks, the parent, if he doesn't demand the child to pay attention, then that child is going to be raised with bad listening habits. And of course, listening, the lack of listening, is probably the number one problem in bad communication. And again, so being that most of us were raised with bad listening habits, and the fact that we are all naturally selfish because we have a sin nature, when we become adults, have got to stop and develop good listening habits. And may I say, that's not easy. Something we have to work at. We have to put time into it. And, you know, when other people are talking, if we're not interested, we'll just daydream them out. We'll time them out, and we'll become preoccupied with something else, or we'll start thinking about something we are interested in. So becoming a good listener develops and demands a whole lot of self-discipline. I want to give us a number of principles that would reinforce this attitude of listening. And the first one is what I call respect your mate. And I'm going to read a number of verses tonight to tie in some of these thoughts and apply them to the idea. James chapter 1, verse number 19 says, "Wherefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God." Now that verse again, swift to hear. I heard an old preacher years ago. I was a little boy. Old country preacher says this. He read this verse and he said, "Well, that just makes all the sense in the world. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we open our mouth." That might be good hillbilly logic, but it's also very biblical here. We're supposed to be swift to hear. And by the way, that is how you and I will show respect to our mate, is when they speak, we listen. One thing that I learned a long time ago as a young husband was my wife has as much right to speak as I do. Now, that wasn't true in the hillbilly culture that I was raised in. The hillbilly culture I was raised in, when the man spoke, the wife would become quiet. My wife taught me that was interrupting. If she was speaking and I spoke over her, that was rude. And for me, it wasn't what I saw as a boy. Again, if the woman was speaking and the man started to speak, the wife would immediately stop speaking and the man would continue talking. But that's wrong. That's disrespectful. And here in the Word of God, nowhere does it say the man has more right to speak than the woman. You said, well, he's the head. Yeah, the Bible does say that the husband's the head, but the head, one should have enough sense to know that would be disrespectful to his wife. Another thing that would help listening would be remove distractions. Now, this is one that I learned a hard way. I don't know how long my wife and I had been married, but we had a disagreement and we were sitting talking about it. And she was sitting on a couch facing me, and I was sitting across the living room on another couch facing her, but I was facing toward outside windows. And then while she was talking, this brand new red Dodge pickup truck came down the road from my house. I picked it up in this window, and I followed it through the second window past my wife. And as I did that, she looked at me and said, "What you looking at?" And I said, "The prettiest red truck I've ever seen." And she got up and walked out of the room. And the reason why she did that is I was paying attention to the truck instead of listening to her. And another time, we were doing the same thing, and the fattest squirrel I've ever seen jumped up on the rail on our porch out the window. And again, my eye caught that, and she again asked me, "What are you looking at?" I said, "The fattest squirrel I've ever seen." And she got up and walked out of the room. And what did I learn? I've learned from that, the next time we had something we needed to discuss, I sat on the couch toward the windows. She sat on the other side, so I wouldn't be distracted by something that went by the windows. Now, with that said, that also means that I should, if I'm in the living room, she comes and wants to talk to me, I should turn the TV off. I should put down the newspaper. I should close my iPad. I should put down any magazine or newspaper or anything like that. What I'm trying to say is, if you need to listen, you better remove a distraction or you're not going to pay attention. Many times I'll be looking at something, my wife will say something, and I don't even hear her. Why? Because I was paying attention to something else. Men are more one track when it comes to listening ability than women. Women can, I don't know, they can hear 2 or 3 conversations once many times. But us men, we need to move distraction. Now, there's two types of distractions we need to remove. One that I call external, which I've just explained. The second one we need to remove is the internal. You know, many times you can be at work and you can have a hard day at work. If you're not careful, you'll bring that hard day work home and the emotions of that hard day. And if you don't remove that, you won't be a good listener that day, that evening. And we've got to deal with emotions, and men do have them. We've got to deal with any sin that is unconfessed. It's hard to be a good listener if you have unconfessed sin. It's hard to be a good listener if you don't deal with those internal issues that may keep you from, it may be bitterness you may need rid of. If you have a bitter heart, you will not listen because you don't think you need to. But again, the second principle to being a good listener is remove distractions. The third principle that will help us be better listeners in this attention of communication is resisting the desire to speak. I want to read a verse to us in Proverbs chapter 18 and verse number 13. It says this: "He that answereth a matter before he heareth it, it is folly and shame unto him." Many people have spoken up and made an idiot of themselves when if they just sit and listen to what the other person is saying, the situation could be solved. But usually, and men are better than this at women, and when I say better, I mean we're more apt to do it, is when our wife are saying something, we'll interrupt them and say something to them that we think will solve the problem. And the problem with that is we have preconceived ideas about what she's saying. Or we have viewed a pattern in what she's saying. Or we have taken that and we apply it back to a past experience. And these three foundations will cause us to say the wrong thing at the wrong time when we should just wait and let her finish speaking. But see, when we interrupt, when we let that desire to speak move us to speak, what it shows is what we want to say is more important than what she wants to say or what she needs to say, and that I am more important than the mate. See, one of the biggest things in being a good listener is humility. And by the way, humility is a choice. 1 Peter chapter 5, James chapter 4, both tell us to humble ourselves, a command, an imperative. So it's something we can do, and something we don't like to do, but that's a great ingredient when it comes to this resisting the desire to speak. And then another thing to help us in this attention of communication or being a good listener is restate what you think your mate said. Because what we say sometimes is not what we meant. And what the other person heard sometimes or what they think they hear sometimes is not what we said or meant. And what you think the other person said about what you said may be misunderstood as well. So it's always good to restate what the other person says to make sure that you heard it correctly. And until you hear it correctly, there's no way for you to respond properly. So restating it is hugely important. Another characteristic, a principle that would help with this attention of communication is request more information. Is this what you said? Is this what you meant? And get back and forth communication for the purpose of understanding. Listen, one thing that communication between husband and wife should not be and cannot become is a competition to win. A competition of win means somebody loses. And if somebody loses, you don't have that agreement that husband and wife need. You don't have that special oneness and togetherness that husband and wife should have. And so communication in a marriage can't be a competition. Well, I've got to win this. If you do, you're going to end up losing. You can win the battle and lose the war, is what I'm trying to say. The reason why I'm saying request this information is because men and women are so different in their communication styles. You know, the old radios, they have AM and FM. You can choose which one you want. If women are AM, men are FM. If men are AM, women are FM. There's just so much different. We're definitely on different wavelengths when it comes to communication. And that's the reason why we need to request information in order to get the clarity that we need. So we see the avenues of communication. We see the attention of communication. Then one more thing tonight, the allowance of time. People today are so busy. They're constantly going. They're constantly on their phone, media device. Yes, they're communicating with text and this and FaceTime and calling and all that kind of stuff. And everybody's so busy that they're not communicating with the people that's most important. See, really the most important people in any of our lives, for me, it should be my wife. It should be my 3 daughters. It should be my 3 son-in-laws. It should be my 12 grandkids. And then other people outside of that, of course, would become my church members and friends and other loved ones. But so much time we spend times on all kind of other things, texting and asking and this and that, but never really communicating with the ones that should be the closest to us. And we've got to allow time for those we love. Take the time. Plan the time. Years ago, I was in my office. This young wife just came right in my office and sat down. Didn't knock, didn't call ahead and say she'd come. She just came walking in and sat down and immediately burst out crying. And I said, "What is wrong?" She said, "I found my husband's planner this week and he had penciled me in, spend time with, And she said, "I don't want to feel like I'm just a checklist on his calendar." I looked at her and said, "Your husband's a busy man, isn't he?" "Well, yeah, he is." I said, "Well, I think instead of being upset that you saw him pencil you and spend time, you need to appreciate the fact that he did schedule time to spend with you. He's trying." And she left feeling better that she finally realized her husband was trying to make sure that he spent time with her. And yes, we should. We should plan time. Our mate is more important than anything else. So now, one thing I've also, as a pastor, dealt with was, a mother. She'll say get 1 or 2 or 3 children, say over a period of 3 to 5 years, and the next thing she knows, she's spending all kind of time taking care of children. In the evening, she's busy taking care of children, getting them ready for bed, and bedtime, getting them to bed, then she's exhausted. And the next thing you know, she'll go a couple of days without spending any quality time with her husband, not for a sexual activity, but just to talk. And so many times the wife will have to plan too, the time to spend together. But there must be an allowance of time. Turn the TV off, turn the ball game off, don't go play golf, or don't go shopping, and you can wait another time, but allow time for communication. And I think every day, if you would really put this idea of communication in a place of importance, you'd find that each day has more opportunities than you'd think. Another factor I think that we need to look at is what I call the appreciation factor. Proverbs chapter 3 gives us a principle in this appreciation factor that I think is huge. Chapter 3 and verse number 27 says this: "Withhold not good from them to whom it is due, when it is in the power of thine hand to do it." One of the easiest ways, and many times one of the most appreciated ways of fulfilling that verse. Again, let me read the verse. "Withhold not good from them to whom it is due, when it is in the power of thine hand to do it." One of the easiest ways and most efficient ways is simply learn and be sincere when said, "Thank you." It's easy for a husband to take his wife for granted when it comes to her cooking meals, or her cleaning house, or washing clothes, or taking care of the children, or just making the house something other than what men would have. We call it life years ago and call it a bachelor's pad, which is usually pretty terrible. But a wife gives a home a feminine touch that's pretty nice, and many times we can take that for granted. We need to learn to say thank you. We need to learn to say, I appreciate what you have done. Many times I've told my wife that I appreciate her ministry to my stomach. My wife is a tremendous cook, and many times she asks, well, what you want to eat? I said, you do a great job, you just fix it. And whatever she fixes, it's just good, just good. And we need to learn that. See, this factor, this appreciative factor of saying thank you and I appreciate you, I think opens and keeps open the door of communication, because it keeps a sweetness in the relationship. When we take each other for granted, and the same is true from the women to the men. I mean, men do all kind of things, from emptying the trash to putting gas in the car or mowing the grass and keeping the outside of the house clean, or even picking up after themselves on the inside of the house, making it easier for the wife. It's nice when the wife thanks the husband for doing those things. Again, it opens and keeps open the door of the ear where you're willing to listen to other things. Next thing, the application of principles. If we really want to improve our communication, we've got to apply the principles of communication. I want you to go with me to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4. When I say the application of principles, I could subtitle this what I call the art of talking. Yes, we were raised talking, but many times we do not and have not studied, again, the principles of Scripture that apply, that makes communication much better. Now, the book of Ephesians has some things to say about communication. Chapter 4. And the first thing I want us to look at is verse number 25. 25. Ephesians chapter 4, verse number 25. Now, before I read that verse, I want to quote a verse out of Psalms 19, verse number 14. It says, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. If we really let that verse become our heart's desire, the words of my mouth. And of course, the words of my mouth is going to be directed because of the meditations of my heart. If I meditate on biblical principle, if I meditate on the importance of my relationship with my wife and my children, where that becomes the two most important things in my life, the principles of God's Word and my family, then the things that come out of my mouth is going to be beneficial and helpful. Here in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse number 25, we find the principle that, yes, it's in the context of the local church. And yes, we should always have a good relationship with people within our local church. We should always do things in the members of our local church to edify and build them up. But the closest person that's going to be a member of your local church is going to be your mate. And here in verse number 25, we see that there is a command to talk.
What stood out to you about tonight's lesson? What did you learn? Was it practical? Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was practical. Yep. Annette.
I just know, and I do this in my everyday life, and I try and correct it, but listening is hard because when I'm listening to somebody, I have thoughts, and I want to say them there before I forget it.
Yes.
So did I interrupt? I'm like, oh, I should not have interrupted. I should have listened.
All right. So I was going to go back to listening later on because I said to my wife, we were about 5-10 minutes in, I was like, maybe I'll just pause the lesson now and do an altar call right now because listening. All right, let's talk about it. Listening, it's a hard thing, at least for many of us, I dare say. And you know who are some of the worst listeners? People who talk all the time. Pastors, quite frankly. All right, I'll indict myself on this. People who are constantly doing public speaking are commonly some of the worst listeners. We're used to having people listening to us rather than listening, all right? And so, I know for myself, I was joking around with my wife about it. I was like, well, yeah, this was for me. I need to hear this section on listening. When you're a problem solver and you hear someone presenting a problem, you want to solve the problem when sometimes you aren't supposed to solve the problem. You're supposed to hear the emotional need.
Well, I think you can always ask the person, be like, now, do you want me to give you an answer for this, or do you just need to tell me what's in your heart?
I suppose, okay, looking at that from a husband's perspective, my wife said, maybe you just need to ask, are you looking for a solution to be brought, or you just need to share this with me? I suppose maybe that may be a good idea, just flat up ask. Guys, we also need to be astute that sometimes our wives, our mate isn't looking for a problem to be solved, but they just need to share what's on their heart. We need to have that awareness. Does listening come naturally, or does it come consciously? Consciously, yeah. Let's talk to the guys a little bit. Guys, what do you think about the section on listening? All right, Brian said everything that needed to be said. Yeah, right? Okay.
It's harder for the men.
It is. We are wired to be problem solvers, and so we'll hear half the problem rather than the entire problem. We'll try and step in and solve it for you. So case closed, move on to the next problem. It's hard to do. Can you guys relate to the red truck or the fat squirrel illustration? The guy's like, huh. The gals are like, yeah. He can relate. Yep. Yeah, guys, any thoughts on that section? Tom.
When we were first married, I had a problem falling asleep when we were talking. And then when it got silent, then I knew I was in trouble.
Hey, I love that. I love that.
Then we found out he had narcolepsy.
Ah,
So then I felt bad.
sure.
He kept writing about it.
That's part of learning and growing together. Yeah. Good. Yep. Janet.
Well, that's not so much listening, but I thought I picked up on what he said, and I thought, boy, I remember my husband. I think she'd say, well, what are you thinking, or whatever, about what? Well, I don't know, I'm not thinking. Honest to be, I remember asking my husband, what are you thinking? I'm thinking about nothing. I thought, how can you think about nothing? It just blew my mind. I thought, I guess it's just there's a difference between a man and a woman.
I'm trying to remember if Pastor Camp touched on that when talking about the difference between male and female. It, well, if he hasn't touched on that yet, he will. He will go to 5-10 minute dissertation on how that generally men have a nothing box and women do not. But
Women, we're like spaghetti brains, and men are like,
single track,
yeah.
yeah.
It's just,
I think there's some truth to that, and I think that's by design. Men have to be focused, be able to sit down for 8 hours, write a message. My wife and I were talking about that this week, or whatever the case. Women are in the house doing dishes, cooking supper on the stove, and managing 4 kids at the same time. We are wired differently.
I think the phone is one of our biggest, what's the word?
That's good. Distractions?
Biggest distraction
Yes.
thing there ever is, because, whether it's,
Yeah.
One person's on their phone and somebody just blurts something out, it's just like, I had no idea you were talking to me,
Right.
But you're just in this world almost, it's not a real world, but you're in this different world, messaging someone or reading something that it's hard for you to just be like, oh, they just talked to me, I need to put this aside for a minute so I can answer that, and then I'll try to get back to this. Because he said it,
Right.
your mate is the most important person.
Yeah.
Or is finishing that message important? Or is liking that social media, whatever, more important? Not easy to do, but
So we live in a world full of technology. Like it or lump it, we're not going to change that. So it is something I have to live with and cope with. So how, my wife was really talking about how that phones, technology is a big distraction, a big hindrance to face-to-face communication in the home. How do we compensate for all that technology that we have? What did he share that we need to do? What was that? I heard it. Remove distractions, okay. And that's good. So he gave illustrations of that, removing distractions. One thing that I have found helpful in a household of 6, rather than me blurting out something, I have to give a direct address. If I want Bradley to do X, Y, Z, I need to call him Bradley to do that. Or if I want to direct something to my wife, I might just say, hey, dear, and get her attention. Same's true with the devices as well.
I think one thing that helps me is instead of just typing a message out on Messenger, type it on your notes. That way you have it saved, it's not gonna go anywhere. And if I do get interrupted, I still have my message there, even though I haven't sent it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
If you have something important you're working through and something you're typing up, a text you're going to send to somebody or an email.
Instead of doing it on the text itself, I do it somewhere else so that I don't
Yeah.
lose it. And if I have to be
Sure.
interrupted, or write it down on a piece of paper where you just
Mhm.
think I need to do this or that, instead
Yeah.
of, I really have to send this. Wait, you wait so I can send this message out.
Mhm.
And our kids feel, wow, like mom just didn't care,
Sure. Yep. It is hard for us to do this. We have got to get back to the mindset, and I'm speaking to myself here, that a face-to-face communication is more important than a device-to-device communication. In other words, if I need to set that down, I need to in order to pick up the face-to-face communication. And I know it's hard because it's like, oh, I was in the middle of this. I'm going to lose this if I don't send it. And I have done that many times. I have lost many things because I didn't. I failed to send a message or a communication to somebody. Be gracious with each other. Yeah. Yep. Hey, can I mention something to you? Hey, can you wait just a second so I can do this? Can I, it's just that balance. Yeah. Miss Pat.
I have to always go back to my grandpa saying, "Patty, you have to be kind."
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes people come to us and they're hurting in some way, but they're not looking for you to tell them what to do. And I don't do that, but I watch. If they're just hurting about something, we do better by just saying, "I'll pray for you right now."
Yep. Yeah. Just be kind. Yep. Rather than just try and solve the problem, be kind. It's possible to solve the problem and be unkind. Take a step back. Be kind. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
A lot of people like how everybody like to do.
Yep. All right. Any other thoughts, comments on what we heard this evening? All right. There's still a lot more to be said about communication. And so we will continue that on, Lord willing, next Wednesday. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I am grateful for these things that we have been hearing and that has been presented tonight. Lord, we have had Scripture presented. I believe we have had a lot of good sound counsel and life experience and wisdom presented. And Lord, I pray that we'll take all that we have heard and we will go and practically live it out and apply it now in our lives. Lord, that we'll take it into our homes, we'll take it into our job sites, we'll take it into our marriages, we'll take it into every aspect of our lives, this matter of communication, and that we will communicate biblically. We will communicate like Christ, that His grace, His kindness will shine through in what we say and how we say it, and also in how we listen. So, Lord, thank you for these things that we've heard. We ask your blessing and your safety as we go our separate ways now. In Jesus'